Yes, my paper is titled, Was Deleuze a Materialist? And in broaching that question, I'm also concerned about the sense in which he was a monist. What I'm trying to get, I hope, will become clear in the course of this paper. But Deleuze said repeatedly that he was an empiricist. Empiricism, as we know, being for Deleuze the one philosophical standpoint that was resolutely non-dialectical and immanentist, thereby avoiding what was for him the whole sad drama of dialectics and transcendence. However, Deleuze never made the same repeated and unambiguous claims about his philosophical relation to materialism. So how are we to understand this seeming discrepancy between Deleuze's respective attitudes towards empiricism and materialism? My argument will be that Deleuze was an anomalous materialist, and that insofar as he was a monist in the spirit of Spinoza, he was an anomalous monist. I borrowed the term anomalous monist from the late Donald Davidson, and I'll say a bit more about this later. At one level, very basic level, it is clear that empiricism, in making the philosophical avowal that reality can only be approached through our senses, belongs to the theory of the subject, whereas materialism, in maintaining in its most basic form that only matter exists, belongs to the theory of the object. Is Deleuze's philosophy therefore in danger of being undermined by the age-old dichotomy between subject being the underlying constitutive basis of our putative empiricism, and object being the concomitant underlying basis of our presumed materialism? My paper will attempt to address this question by arguing that Deleuze's key category of the event bridges the ontological gap represented by the seeming dichotomy between the subject of empiricism and the object of materialism. The Deleuzean event belongs to neither subject nor object, but places both subject and object in a new assemblage, an assemblage in which the object becomes evented, as in, what is the event featuring the object X? And the subject is rendered eventive, as in, what is the event into which the subject S is drawn? Events in the Deleuzean scheme of things are beyond the age-old philosophical dichotomy of subject and object, and Deleuze's philosophical framework is therefore capable in principle of being both empiricist and materialist, provided materialism is defined in such a way that we avoid the absurd position that there is nothing else in the universe apart from matter. Now, this is a contentious claim, but I don't think that any materialism that says that there is nothing in the universe apart from matter really makes sense. Now, this is all in the way of a preliminary throat clearing. Let's see how this works out in more detail by looking at the relevant Deleuzean philosophies. Now, to get back to this claim about materialism, Deleuze cannot be regarded as an unqualified or crude materialist. There is an obvious sense in which there is no such thing as an unqualified materialist. That is the person who insists flatly that matter is all there is. Now, I realize that these are deep and murky waters that have been trawled by philosophers for centuries. However, due to the constraints of time, my formulations here are declarative rather than analytical. Now, of course, there are physicalist or materialist monisms, where it is insisted that all the properties we encounter can be reduced to physical properties or the properties of matter. So, reductionism in this sense, I think is permissible. And I differentiate between this kind of reductionism and the claim, which I believe to be absurd, matter is the only thing that exists. But so why is this kind of monistic materialism wrong? Aren't all monists, and Deleuze as a follower of Spinoza certainly was a monist, committed to being either materialists or idealists? Let me begin with the construction of an argument before I deal with the questions that arise from a philosophical commitment to a monistic materialism. It seems to me that the moment materialism is constituted as part of an intellectual or theoretical field, the moment one asserts the thesis or doctrine of materialism, asserting being, of course, a speech act, and thus by its very nature non-material, that moment of assertion becomes the instant when one has to produce axioms which create a thinking about matter, and that thinking and its accompanying axioms cannot, of course, cannot of itself be purely material. Because we're posing here the questions of the forms that are appropriate to the constitution of matter. What kind of reflection is proper to any thinking done with regard to matter? Such questions immediately take us beyond an unqualified or knuckle-dragging materialism. Quite simply, while horses are material beings, the set of horses is not itself a material being. While a mountain is a material entity, the concept of a mountain is not itself material. So, an unqualified monistic materialism for me is incoherent. But let's get back to the subject of the Deleuzean event. Deleuze introduced the notion of the event in his Logique du Sens to designate the immediate resultant of the interaction of various forces. As a result of this interaction, one or more immanent changes, immanent, comes into being. Deleuze indicates that his understanding of the event is derived from the Stoic concept of lecta. Lecta are incorporeal transformations that hover beyond and above the world of space and time, but which can be expressed in language. The product of an amalgam of forces is the event. The event therefore designates a particular internal dynamic of this amalgam of forces. It should be stressed that the event is not a specific occurrence or happening, but is rather that which is rendered actual in this or that happening or occurrence. To provide an example, tree leaves turn yellow in the autumn before they die. The Deleuzean and Stoic event is not what manifestly occurs, the leaves becoming yellow. The leaves becoming yellow is only a fleeting consequence or expression of the actualization of this event. This event, the leaves becoming yellow, is the resultant of an amalgam of forces: seasonal weather changes, soil conditions, geographic location, the tree's genetic makeup, and the effects of this genetic makeup on leaf pigmentation, and so on. So rather than saying the leaves became yellow, or the leaves are now yellow, both of which imply a modification of the essence of the tree or leaf, we should say, says Deleuze, the tree yellows or the leaves yellow. The use here of the infinitive form to yellow enables us to make a predication with regard to the tree or leaves, which reflects the dynamism of this event's actualization, an incorporeality distinct from both the leaves themselves and yellowness itself, but which nevertheless expresses the event's dynamism. Deleuze's account of the event enables us to dispense with an ontology based on substances and the fixed states and qualities of these substances, and with this the identities based on substance. This ontology has prevailed since the time of Plato, and as we know so well, Deleuze wants to overcome or circumvent this Platonism. What are the defining characteristics of an event? An event lacks a determinate structure. is without spatio-temporal position, is immaterial, and has no beginning or end, has no limits, and by virtue of having no limits, connects with every other event. Even an inert object can be an event as long as we can identify it as part of a novel and distinctive process. For example, a dead tree is an inert object, but it becomes eventive if, say, during a battle, there's a short burst of activity in which a soldier dives behind the dead tree to avoid a sniper's bullet. As I said earlier, an event expresses the internal dynamism of the process in which it is involved. Deleuze said repeatedly that he was an empiricist. Empiricism, as we know, being for Deleuze the one philosophical standpoint that was resolutely non-dialectical and immanentist, thereby avoiding what was for him the whole sad drama of dialectics and transcendence. However, Deleuze never made the same repeated and unambiguous claims about his philosophical relation to materialism. Yes, my paper is titled, Was Deleuze a Materialism? So how are we to understand this seeming discrepancy between Deleuze's respective attitudes towards empiricism and materialism? My argument will be that Deleuze was an anomalous materialist, and that insofar and in broaching that question, I'm also concerned about the sense in which he was a monist. What I'm trying to get, I hope, will become clear in the course of this paper.